Yeah, you're right. You might be out of your mind. I think that look, there's a happy medium, right? I mean, we don't really do nuance very well in Philadelphia, but there's a gray area in there where you can say, okay, look, they've got a ways to go. The offense is not very good. It wasn't good last year. It's still the worst in the league this year. But as you said, last year they still had some guys who were NBA pieces, and they had to unload those guys and start over. Now they have talent that's not nearly as NBA ready, and they're trying to groom them. And considering the roster turnover, where they are defensively, where they are as a passing team, it's not bad. I mean, they're making steps. So all the people who say, they're awful and it's the worst team ever, they just haven't been paying attention. But we're still a long way, I think, from seeing what these guys could potentially do, and from even considering them as contenders.
Well, and that doesn't mean I think it's going to happen in 2 or 3 years. It could be 5 to 7 years, but that's how far off I think the other three teams could be right now. And John, you write, I know you probably don't write the headline, but it says, the critics are oblivious to the facts. What are some of the things that stood out to you, though, that make you think that this team is making them improve and turning the corner maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think we read stories, we hear people on the radio, certainly not you, guys on TV who just want to take shots at the plan and Sam Hinkie because they don't like it, but they're not really paying attention to what the Sixers have been doing lately. Last year, they were the worst defensive team in the league. This year, they're 12th in defensive rating. That is a massive, massive lead. Actually, I think they were 4th to last, but they are now currently 12th. And since January 21, they're 3rd. And then just look at what they did against Golden State in this last game. Yeah, they lost, but the first time they played Golden State, they got stomped by 40. In this game, they lose by 5. They hold them under 100 points, which nobody had done in 21 games. It was since Christmas, and it was the fewest points they've scored in the last 21 games. They just look, they're much better defensively than they were, and that's not nothing. And then on top of that, they're 8th in the league in assist percentage. Now, their actual assists aren't as high, but the point here is that on the baskets that they make, they share the ball. And in today's NBA, you got to move the ball because when the ball sticks, it's a killer. It's an offense killer. And you got to be able to hit threes. So, one step at a time on the threes, but they're moving the ball, they're playing defense. And those are two things you could not say about them last year.
No doubt about it. And they certainly this year, it seems like, have bought into the plan that we're going to be a defensive-minded team. But I'll ask you, Gonzo, because Noel, a lot of people thought he would be the savior. He was going to change everything. And, offensively, he's raw. But how much do you think he has changed the complexion of this team defensively? And there's so much talk about, do you keep him? Is he going to be traded because they're going to get a high pick and there's big guys in this draft? What do you think of Noel, and do you think he's a guy that should be here for the long term?
Yeah, Noel's sort of the perfect personification for, the bigger picture, what you're talking about with the Sixers, right? Because if you were looking for the Sixers or on a micro level, Nerlens Noel to be an offensive force, then you're probably really disappointed because he's not that. And I don't know that he's ever going to be that. However, defensively, he has been, for a rookie, about as good as you could have possibly hoped. He leads all rookies in rebounds, steals, and block shots. But beyond that, if you look at his rim protection numbers, and I think it's really important, and this is a key on why they've been such a better team defensively. If you look at his rim protection numbers, what opponents are shooting at the rim against him is really low. It's in the 46-47% range. And to put that in perspective, that is better. That is a lower figure than guys like DeAndre Jordan, Andre Drummond, Anthony Davis, quality rim protectors in the NBA. There are players who shoot at a higher percentage against them than they do against Nerlens. And what that means is the other guys who were over-rotating last year, who had to sag into the paint to give help defense, they don't have to do that now. They can stay home or they can double-team shooters. And that is a massive, massive difference. I mean, to have a guy who can, if not block shots all the time, at least alter them, is hugely important to defensive ratings. So if you imagine moving forward, say maybe him and Embiid, when Sam Hinkie drafted Embiid, he said, well, if you're going to have a redundancy in skill set, the best place to do it is at the rim. He had a point because you have one right now, and two would be even better.
Yeah, now that's interesting because last year, John, they were 109.9. This year, they're down to 100.5. But as you said, since January, they've been the third best team defensively. And a lot of that's got to be Noel. He's virtually lopped 10 points a game off this team's average. What is going to happen when they do add Embiid out there? I mean, how good defensively can you envision this team being with both of those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be interesting because in theory, on paper, defensively, they should be, another step better, right? But I wonder about the fit offensively, and then also if they don't fit offensively, do they end up staggering their minutes? And if they do stagger them, how would that affect them defensively? I mean, there's so many variables. I know that Brett Brown is really excited about it. He loves the idea of those two guys playing on the floor together. And it is, if you're looking for like a silver lining for the Sixers, the idea next year that they could be starting Embiid, Noel, MCW, and then the next 2 first-rounders that they'll get this year, that would be 5 lottery picks starting for the Sixers next year. That's an exciting prospect. I mean, who knows if it'll work out? A lot of people like to say, there's no guarantee this plan will work. Well, there's no guarantee any plan will work, but I like the idea of 5 first-rounders.
No doubt about it. And, here's another interesting thing. At what point, though, do you think that this team – now, 12-41 is a horrible record, but we're not really judging them on that. At what point do we start judging this team on wins and losses? Because at some point you got to start saying, all right, you can't have this culture of losing anymore. You got to start being judged on your wins and losses. When does that start?
Yeah, that's fair. I think probably year after next, because next year you've got to phase Embiid back in his first year. You're going to have 2 other first-round picks, 2 other lottery picks that you'll also move into the fold. That's 3 new pieces in your starting lineup, all of whom will be rookies. That is a lot to ask. So I think the year after next, when all of those guys have at least 1 year under their belt, and then also maybe you're adding Sarge. So now potentially, if you don't unload anybody, which is a big if, you've got 6 lottery picks in your rotation, which is obscene. Then it's time to okay, what's your record? Have you improved like the Milwaukee Bucks did last year, where they went from worst to a potential playoff team? Then there's really not going to be any excuse. I'm not saying that they have to make the playoffs or even contend, but I do think you'd have to see appreciable year-over-year return.
John Gonzalez, CSNPhilly.com columnist. We're looking at the 76ers at the break. Moving forward with this team, obviously, is very interesting with all the assets they have. At what point then, John, do you want to see them be a player in free agency? Is it this offseason that they finally say, all right, there's a piece we like, we're going to go spend the money and go get it? Or do you continue with just letting these kids play for another year?
Yeah, I mean, my take and what I think they'll do are probably different. There are some really interesting restricted free agents coming up, and for people who don't know, restricted free agent, you can put in an offer, but the team that has their rights has a chance to match that offer. So, for example, last year, Gordon Hayward, who's a really talented wing, initially signed an offer sheet with Charlotte, and then Utah matched. So this year, there are 2 guys out there in Kawhi Leonard and Draymond Green who are restricted free agents and who are going to get paid big bucks. Sixers, obviously, like a lot of teams, have huge cap space. I would love to see them just put in a max offer for both of those guys, knowing that most likely their teams are going to sign them, certainly with Kawhi Leonard, almost certainly with Draymond Green. But if they don't and you luck into it, you still have a massive amount of cap space, and you just stole away a huge wing player. Wing is the thinnest position in the NBA. And then on top of it, you're adding in those other 3 first-round lottery picks. All of a sudden, you've got a really nice core and that's really young that you can hit the reset button on, immediately. Now you're looking at, you're probably looking at playoffs. I don't think they're going to do that. I think probably they sit on their money at least 1 more year before they start spending it.
John, MCW, your thoughts? I know a lot of people are torn on him. Is he a part of this? Do they want to trade him? We know Hinkie will pull a trade if the right assets or if the right thing's there. Do you think MCW is a guy that would be a mistake in dealing?
Well, what are you going to get for him? This is my thing. I mean, I really like him as a guy who he does a lot of things that are likable. Considering that he has no talent around him, he's been really good passing the ball. His assist numbers, his rebound numbers, those are all quality for a point guard. There's no doubt about it. And he's not a bad on-ball defender. The problem is that shooting. I mean, he's just a really, really bad shooter. He's a worse shooter this year than he was last year, and maybe that's owed to, he had a shoulder injury. He didn't get to work on his shot as much during the offseason. But let's say, for the sake of example, you want to move him, right? He's not that young for a second-year player. Remember, he was a little bit older coming out of college. And then on top of that, point guard is the deepest position in the NBA. I'm not sure he's a top 20 point guard in the NBA right now. So even if you wanted to move him, you got to find a taker that's going to look at him and go, okay, well, we'll take him, even though he has to work on his shot and may never develop. I just don't know what you're going to get in return.
Fair, John. And how about, I don't know how much you've seen of Embiid if you get down there at 5:30 and watch him shoot around. And Sam Henke kind of joked the other day, you want to see him play? Come down at 5:30 and watch him. Are you getting a chance to see him? And is there something that makes you say, you know what, I understand what they saw in this guy. I mean, it's at a slow pace, but when he can crank it up, this guy's got the skill set. Are you a believer in him?
I was a believer before. I'm a believer if he's healthy. I think, yeah, if you get down there at 5:30, you can see him. He likes to shoot three-pointers. He likes to shoot sometimes.
He's pretty good at that, by the way.
He is pretty good at it. And, we saw some video of him after practices. The media is only allowed to watch the very back end of practice, sort of playing D on Nerlens Noel. He still has to shed some weight. He's still got to get in shape. I think if his foot can hold up, if his back can hold up, talent-wise, I don't think talent is a question at all. I think it's more of a health consideration. But, yeah, I liked him quite a bit, and I think that the Sixers really lucked into him in an odd way, a sort of counterintuitive way. They lucked into him having an injury, because if he hadn't had that injury, I don't think he falls to the Sixers at 3.
Well, they lucked into him, and they lucked into Robert Covington somehow. John, he might be the MVP of this team. Is he, in your opinion, a keeper, or is this just a good player on a bad team? Is he Hunter Pence on the Astros?
That's an interesting analogy. I think he's a keeper. I really do. I mean, look, every team in the NBA, including the Sixers, the first time around, passed on him. He was undrafted. He got cut by his middle school team 3 times. He's the guy who's
guy's Michael Jordan all of a sudden. Look at this story.
I know, right? It's really interesting. And now all of a sudden, he's in the Rising Stars game. He's become, for a team that obviously needs offense and doesn't have any shooters, he has been their best scoring, shooting option. So I think he's a keeper, no doubt about it. Depends what kind of rotation they're going to have once they factor in Embiid in the next 2 first-round draft picks and Sarge. I certainly think he ends up in your rotation, in your top 8, because you're still always going to need a guy who can knock down a shot, stand over there in the corner, hit a corner 3, and he can do that very, very well. So considering that they have him they send him to a 4-year deal that's only partially guaranteed, they've got him really, really cheap over the next 3 years. So that's another guy they lucked into. I mean, he was just sitting there. So far, not so bad. There's some pieces that you could build around.
John Gonzalez, CSN Philly.com's columnist, take a look at his article, by the way, about the Sixers and where they are. And, John, how about KJ McDaniels? He's another guy who they kind of, he was sitting there in the second round. A lot of people liked him. They get him. Now he's got this 1-year deal, which is kind of interesting. But is he a guy that you think is an NBA player on a team that ends up being pretty good? Or is he, because he's getting these minutes, he looks better than maybe he is?
Yeah, KJ's an interesting case study as well for a number of reasons. Beginning of the year, I think everybody was real bullish on him. He was shooting really well. His shooting has fallen off considerably over the last month and a half, and as a result, his minutes have dropped a little bit. He still does something almost every game where you realize what an athletic freak he is. And as I said, if point guard is the deepest position in the NBA, the wing is probably the thinnest. So having a guy like him who is so athletic, who's good defensively, who's a crazy shot blocker, which is really, really rare for small forward, I think there's obviously a spot for him in the NBA. I think he's a rotation player, even on a good team. The question is, at the end of the year, what do his shooting numbers look like, and how much is he worth? Because, like you said, he gambled on himself, and rather than sign the typical second-round, partially guaranteed 4-year deal, he took a 1-year deal, which makes him a restricted free agent at the end of the year, and somebody's going to sign him or at least offer him more money than he would have otherwise gotten. The question is, do the Sixers offer him a better deal, or do they then match? And I'm not sure. I guess it depends on what the offer looks like, but he's a nice piece to have. I think that, he's probably a back-end rotation guy, somewhere in the 8 to 10 range if you're going to rotate that many guys, but he's certainly an NBA player.
Yeah, and then I guess obviously the offseason philosophy of this draft coming up. You got your 2 big guys. We all know that Okafor, do you just say got to take the best player? How would you surmise their thinking when it comes to that point where they have to make a decision? Now, last year, they decided to go with Embiid when they already had Noel. Would they do the same thing again if in the same spot?
That's super interesting, and I sort of oscillate back and forth on that because the consensus right now is that is that Okafor would be the guy, right? That he's the number one pick, and he probably is. But I wonder, do you grab 3 big men, or do you end up flipping one of them? It doesn't seem like they're going to want to flip Embiid because he would be the highest upside guy. So then do you move Nerlens, but then what kind of yield does Nerlens get in a trade in the same way that I'm not sure because of MCW and his position and his shooting issues what he would yield? So there's so many different variables here. The other option is I think in like a month or so, there are going to be a lot of people clamoring for D'Angelo Russell. And if you haven't watched D'Angelo Russell, he's the guard from Ohio State that I think a lot of people are going to be really high on. And that fit-wise and talent-wise would make a whole lot of sense for the Sixers, because then you'd have, Sarge coming in, if not next year, probably the year after, plus Embiid, plus Nerlens, plus MCW, plus D'Angelo Russell, who maybe could play off the ball if you needed him to, plus whoever they take with that Miami Heat pick for the first round. I think a lot of people are going to get really excited about D'Angelo Russell coming up here.
That'll be interesting, too, because they need that kind of scorer. They need a guy who can just flat-out shoot, can be the athletic guy that you're saying is lacking in this league. Because right now, John, it looks like they can play defense, and it looks like they can do some of the things that good teams do. They can't finish games out. They're very young, and they can't find that scorer. They got to try to develop a guy, because that's the hardest thing to find, it seems like, anymore. And we all know the draft is such a crapshoot. If you have an opportunity to get one, I guess you got to pull the trigger, but size is also hard to find. But the Sixers have a luxury where they have size, so they're going to be in a tough spot.
Yeah, I mean, although it's a tough spot to want to be in. I mean, if you're rebuilding, all the people will say, the rebuild is terrible, and I can't believe it. I think they're going to feel a lot different about it next year when you're looking at quite a lot of lottery picks starting on the team. And then you're starting to see how the outlines have started to fill in for this plan. And like you said, offensively, they are horrendous right now. I mean, if there's any area where they can improve, it is unquestionably finding a shooter/scorer. And that's why, ultimately, if all things were equal and you didn't have Embiid and you didn't have Noel, it would be Okafor if you had the shot at the first pick. And I don't think it would be a question.
You're
not picking first, and D'Angelo's there. Okay, well, now you got a question.
My last thought would be, is there any concern at all that Brett Brown just says, I've had this, I've had it, I'm out? Any concern in that at all? Because obviously there's going to be teams I would assume that say, you know what, this guy can coach. He's winning 12 games with this bunch. We want him. Would there be any concern that he just says, you know what, I'm burned out, I can't take this anymore?
No, I think he signed. Don't forget, he signed a 4-year deal, and he had a fight for that 4th year when they were trying to bring him in. Initially, the Sixers wanted to give him 3 years and then reevaluate. He said, "I'm not leaving San Antonio unless I get that 4th." I think he's in it. I think he's frustrated sometimes. I think he gets, because there are guys when they had Larry Drew, and he really liked Larry Drew as a backup point guard. Then the Sixers cut him. They replaced him with Tony Frazier on a 10-day, and some of that stuff I think gets to Brett, but ultimately, I think he's starting to see some of the fruits of his labors, and that's appealing to him. And it's in his mind. I mean, you talk to him about Embiid and Noel on the floor at the same time, and the guy beams. So I think he sees it too. It's just everybody has to sort of wait it out.
At Gonzo CSN, check it out at csnphilly.com. John's column on the Sixers, who are at the break 12-41. But Noel and Robert Covington will be a part of All-Star Weekend. Gonzo, always good to catch up, buddy.
All right, my man.